The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, painting the suburban neighborhood in streaks of gold and orange. 16-year-old Aaliyah Johnson gripped the steering wheel of her mother's dark SUV, her basketball duffel bag tossed carelessly on the passenger seat. Sweat still clung to her forehead from practice, and the rhythmic squeak of sneakers on the court echoed faintly in her mind. It had been a long day, but she felt proud. She had made 3 clean shots in a row during drills, and her coach had told her she was improving fast. All she wanted now was to get home, shower, and surprise her mom with the leftover brownies her teammates' mom had packed. But just as she turned onto their quiet street, the sudden flash of blue and red lights flooded her rearview mirror. Her heart skipped. Aaliyah's stomach tightened into knots as she eased the car to the curb. She hadn't been speeding, at least she didn't think so. The SUV's hum fell into silence as she shut off the ignition, her hands trembling slightly as she set them carefully at 10 and 2 on the wheel. Her mother had drilled that into her. Always keep your hands visible, always stay calm. Still, fear prickled along her skin. She was young, black, and alone, and the stories she had heard were never far from her thoughts. A heavy-set man emerged from the squad car, his mirrored sunglasses glinting as he approached. He walked with the slow swagger of someone who enjoyed the intimidation his badge gave him. Officer Daniels, his name tag gleamed in the sunlight, rested one hand on his holster as though ready for trouble. The gesture wasn't lost on Aaliyah. Her pulse quickened. License and registration, he demanded flatly, his voice carrying more disdain than authority. "Yes, sir," Aaliyah murmured, fumbling slightly as she retrieved her wallet and the car documents from the glove box. She passed them through the open window with careful hands, not daring to make any sudden moves. Daniels took them and glanced over the papers, his lip curling as if something amused him. "Whose car is this?" he asked, leaning down so his shadow swallowed her face. "It's my mom's, sir," Aaliyah answered. His smirk deepened when his eyes flicked to the military decal on the rear windshield. The one her mother never took off, a proud marker of her service. Daniels chuckled mockingly. "Your mom? Special Forces or something?" he scoffed. "Don't tell me she's some kind of hero." "Cute story, kid." Heat flushed Aaliyah's face. She clenched her jaw, fighting the urge to defend her mother. Captain Maya Johnson wasn't just some kind of hero. She had spent years in combat zones, led missions that no civilian could even imagine, and saved lives most people would never know about. But her work had always been shadowed in secrecy, buried under the weight of classified files. To Daniels, it was just another chance to mock a young girl. "Yes, sir," she served. Aaliyah said, quietly, trying to keep her tone respectful. Daniels laughed, shaking his head. "Sure she did. And I'm the President of the United States. Tell you what, maybe stick to basketball, huh? Don't start making up bedtime stories." He handed back her license with exaggerated slowness, letting it dangle just out of her reach before dropping it into her lap. The humiliation burned hot in Aaliyah's chest, her pride scraping against the officer's ridicule. She gripped the license tightly, her knuckles white, and stared straight ahead, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her eyes well up. But then the officer's radio crackled with static, dispatch mumbling something about a traffic incident nearby. Daniels raised the device to his mouth, distracted for a brief moment, and that was when Aaliyah noticed another vehicle rolling up the street. A sleek black car, windows tinted, stopped just behind the patrol car. The door opened, and out stepped her mother. Captain Maya Johnson was still in uniform, her boots clicking against the pavement as she strode forward. Her presence was magnetic, broad shoulders squared, eyes sharp as steel, medals pinned neatly on her chest. Even out of combat, she radiated authority. Daniels froze mid-step, the smirk slipping from his face as his eyes locked onto the insignia stitched onto her uniform. For the first time since he had walked up to Aaliyah's window, his arrogance faltered. His posture stiffened, his lips parted, but no words came. The street, once heavy with tension, now seemed to hold its breath. And in that instant, Aaliyah knew the officer had no idea who he had just mocked. The precinct's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting A cold glow across the reception desk where Kiana sat silently, her small hands folded in her lap, clutching the strap of her backpack. Officer Daniels leaned casually against the counter, his smirk widening as he replayed his words in his head, clearly proud of the joke he had made at her expense. Special Forces, he chuckled again, shaking his head as if the idea itself was absurd. Kid, your mom probably works in some cafeteria. Don't waste our time. His words stung, not because Kiana believed him, but because it was the same dismissive tone she had heard her whole life from people who saw her skin first and her worth last. She bit her lip, refusing to cry, her young mind repeating her mother's lessons. Hold your head high even when they try to bring you low. But Daniels wasn't done. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so that only she could hear, his badge gleaming under the overhead light. You should be careful making up stories like that. People don't like liars. And if you keep wasting police time, we might have to call social services, you understand? His words were sharp, meant to frighten, but Kiana only clenched her jaw tighter. He didn't know her mom. He didn't know anything. She wanted to snap back, wanted to tell him everything about the medals hidden in the drawer at home, about the training exercises she had secretly watched from behind fences, about the scars her mother carried, like history etched into her skin. But she remembered her mom's warning, never reveal my work unless I stand beside you. Some truths need the right witness. So instead, Kiana said nothing. The silence seemed to irritate Daniels more than any argument could. He leaned back, sighing as though dealing with her was a burden. He made a show of writing something down on his notepad, the scratching of the pen loud in the still room, and then tossed the paper carelessly on the desk. Go sit over there, he said, jerking his thumb toward a row of worn-out chairs along the wall. We'll wait for your mom. Let's see how Special Forces walks through that door. The other officers, half listening, chuckled quietly, some shaking their heads, some whispering to each other, the way people do when they think they're safe in a crowd. To them, she was just another kid from the wrong side of town, making up stories to cover up some kind of trouble. Kiana could feel their eyes on her, burning holes into her dignity, but she lifted her chin and walked to the chair with deliberate steps, just as her mother had taught her, to move like she belonged, even when the world tried to tell her otherwise. The clock ticked painfully slow, each second echoing like a drumbeat. Daniels occasionally glanced up at her, grinning smugly, tapping his holster with his fingers as if to remind her of his authority. Special Forces, he mouthed once more, shaking his head in disbelief. Kiana sat there, calm but seething, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and defiance. She whispered under her breath, barely audible, just wait, and as if the universe itself had heard her, the heavy glass doors of the precinct swung open with a force that silenced the room. The glass doors slammed shut behind her, and in that instant the precinct's easy laughter dissolved into a silence so sharp it seemed to cut the air. Kiana's mother, Sergeant Major Alana Brooks, didn't just walk in, she commanded the room. Her presence was a storm wrapped in discipline, each step deliberate, her boots striking the linoleum floor like a battle drum. Her uniform, pressed to perfection, bore the insignia of someone who had seen more combat zones than the men in that room had ever read about, her chest decorated with ribbons and medals that caught the harsh fluorescent light like shards of fire. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her jaw set in steel, her eyes scanning the room with the cold precision of a soldier assessing a battlefield. The officers, who only moments ago had been smirking, shifted uneasily in their seats, some straightening instinctively, others averting their gaze. Alana didn't acknowledge them. Her gaze locked immediately on her daughter. Kiana rose slowly, her chest swelling with pride despite the knot in her stomach. For a second, the little girl's mask of composure cracked, her lips trembling as relief washed over her. But Alana gave the slightest nod, a silent order to stand tall, and Kiana remembered herself, lifting her chin once more. Officer Daniels, however, leaned back in his chair, trying to mask the flicker of unease creeping into his eyes with a lazy smirk. Well, he said, forcing a laugh that rang hollow, so this must be Special Forces. His words dripped with sarcasm, but his voice betrayed the tremor he tried to hide. Alana's boots stopped inches from his desk. She didn't shout, didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The authority radiating from her was louder than any scream. "Officer Daniels," she said, her tone clipped, controlled, but heavy with warning. "Stand up." It wasn't a request, it was an order. Daniels hesitated, chuckling nervously, glancing toward his colleagues for backup, but none moved to support him. Reluctantly, he pushed himself to his feet, trying to tower over her with his extra height, but somehow he still looked small, like a child standing before a judge. Alana reached into her pocket and pulled out her military identification, sliding it across the desk with a deliberate hand. The gold emblem gleamed against the dull surface, and the sight of it made several officers stiffen visibly. Daniels swallowed hard, his earlier bravado crumbling as he read the words. United States Army Special Forces, Sergeant Major Alana Brooks. Her record was a legend whispered across bases, her reputation carried in hushed tones among men who knew what true combat demanded. Alana leaned forward, her eyes locked on his, her voice low but carrying across the room. "The next time you mock my child for telling the truth, remember this. My service bought you the freedom to sit in that chair wearing that badge you disgrace." The weight of her words sank into the room, the silence so suffocating that even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to fade. Daniels opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face drained of color, the smirk long gone, replaced by a stunned pallor. He had mocked a child's claim, laughed at the idea of her mother's worth. And now the reality stood before him in flesh and blood, more formidable than anything his badge could shield him from. Kiana, still standing by the wall, felt her chest swell, with a pride so fierce it made her eyes water. The humiliation of minutes ago evaporated, replaced with awe as she watched her mother, her hero, make an entire precinct stand frozen with nothing but her presence. Alana didn't linger on Daniels. She turned, placed a steady hand on her daughter's shoulder, and said simply, "Let's go." And as they walked toward the doors together, the sound of her boots echoed like thunder in the stillness she left behind. The precinct remained silent long after the heavy doors shut behind Alana and Kiana, the echoes of her boots still ringing in the ears of every officer present. It was as if a storm had passed through, leaving behind a stunned calm where no one dared breathe too loudly. Officer Daniels stood frozen, staring at the military ID she had slid across his desk, his hands trembling slightly, though he tried to hide it by shoving them into his pockets. The other officers, who had laughed so freely before, shifted uneasily in their chairs, exchanging glances that carried both guilt and shame. Not one of them had expected the little girl's claims to be true, let alone that her mother would appear in such commanding fashion. And yet, there she had been, a living embodiment of discipline and honor, turning their mockery into a mirror reflecting their own smallness. Captain Ruiz, who had been watching from his office window the entire time, finally emerged, his expression grim. He was a man known for keeping order, for running a tight ship, and now that very order had been shattered by the arrogance of his own men. His gaze swept the room, lingering on Daniels until the younger officer squirmed under the weight of it. "Do you realize what you've done?" Ruiz's voice carried no anger, only disappointment, which made it cut even deeper. Daniels stammered, fumbling for words, but none came that could excuse the mockery, the laughter, the dismissal of a child who had only spoken the truth. The captain picked up the military ID, still lying on the desk, turning it over in his hand with reverence. "Sergeant Major Alana Brooks," he said softly, more to himself than to the room. "I've heard that name before." Decorated in 3 tours, led missions that most of us couldn't imagine surviving. She's a legend in uniform. He set the ID down slowly, his eyes sharp as they lifted to Daniels. "And you mocked her daughter for speaking her mother's truth." Daniels swallowed, his cheeks flushing with humiliation. But before he could respond, another officer spoke from the back, his voice edged with guilt. "We all did, sir." The admission hung heavy in the air, a collective shame none could escape. Ruiz exhaled, rubbing his temple as though the weight of their actions pressed against his skull. Do you understand the consequences? Not just for you, but for this entire department? Word spreads fast. Do you think a woman of her standing, of her record, will simply forget this? The thought lingered like smoke in the room, and though no one dared say it aloud, they all knew the truth. Alana Brooks did not strike them as someone who forgot insults easily, especially those aimed at her child. Outside, Alana and Kiana walked hand in hand, the chill evening air brushing against their faces. Kiana looked up at her mother, her heart bursting with both pride and relief. "Mama," she whispered, her voice small but steady, "they didn't believe me." Alana stopped, kneeling so her eyes met her daughter's, her hands firm on Kiana's shoulders. "They don't have to believe you," she said, her tone gentle but resolute. "The truth doesn't need their approval to be real. What matters is that you stood tall. You remembered who you are." Kiana's lips curved into the faintest smile, though her eyes still glistened with the remnants of humiliation. Alana brushed a thumb across her cheek. "Remember this day, baby. The world will try to make you doubt yourself. Don't ever let it." Kiana nodded, and in that moment she felt something shift inside her, an ember of resilience sparked by the fire in her mother's words. Back inside, Ruiz dismissed the room with a wave, but not before leveling one final order at Daniels. "My office. Now." The other officers dispersed silently, their usual chatter replaced with the heavy weight of reflection. Daniels dragged himself forward, his confidence long dissolved. Ruiz didn't yell. His voice was quiet, stern, more cutting than anger ever could be. "You embarrassed this badge today. You disrespected a soldier who's given more for this country than you ever will. And you humiliated a child. Consider this your final warning." Daniels nodded stiffly, but the look in his eyes betrayed something deeper, fear. For the first time, he understood that the story wouldn't end here. Sergeant Major Alana Brooks had walked out of the building, but her presence lingered, and the consequences of his arrogance were only beginning to unfold. The next morning, the town was buzzing with whispers about the confrontation at the station. Maya walked into school, head held high, no longer shrinking under the weight of mockery. She knew the truth now, that her mother wasn't just strong, but a legend in her own right. However, not everyone was ready to let it go. Officer Daniels, humiliated by the exposure of his arrogance, showed up at the school under the pretense of giving a safety talk. But Maya could see the bitterness in his eyes when he scanned the crowd, searching for her. He wanted to restore his pride, to reassert control. Yet, before he could make a scene, the gym doors opened, and in walked her mother, not in uniform but in civilian clothes. Even without the military gear, she commanded the room with her calm yet powerful presence. The students went silent, teachers straightened, and Daniels froze as if the ground beneath him had vanished. Maya's mother didn't raise her voice. Instead, she shared her story, how she had trained overseas, led missions most would never dare attempt, and how the discipline and sacrifice of service shaped who she was today. She didn't boast, she didn't threaten. She simply told the truth. The gym remained still, every ear hanging on her words. Maya watched her classmates' eyes shift from mockery to awe, and she felt her heart swell with pride. Daniels tried to interrupt, but his voice trembled when he spoke, as though the weight of her reputation crushed his authority. Her mother turned to him and with a steady gaze said, "Respect is earned, officer, not demanded. Perhaps you should remember that." The applause that followed wasn't just for Maya's mother, it was for Maya, too. She was no longer the quiet girl with the crazy story about her mom. She was the daughter of someone extraordinary, and that meant something. As Daniels shuffled out, red-faced and defeated, Maya knew life had changed. She wasn't invisible anymore, and more importantly, she had learned something vital. Her mother's strength wasn't just in her past as a soldier, but in the dignity and resilience she carried every single day. And now Maya carried it too. The days that followed were unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. At school, Kids who once mocked her now treated her with an odd mix of respect and curiosity. Some apologized awkwardly, others tried to befriend her overnight, and a few just avoided her altogether. But Maya wasn't seeking their approval anymore. She had found her confidence in something deeper. One afternoon, while she was walking home, a patrol car pulled up beside her. It was Officer Daniels. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced with an uneasy stiffness. He rolled down the window and, after a long pause, muttered an apology. Maya could see how much it cost him to say those words. He admitted he had been wrong, not just about her mother, but about how he carried himself as a police officer. Still, Maya didn't rush to forgive him. She simply nodded, remembering her mother's lesson. Respect must be earned, not given freely out of fear or demand. That evening, her mother sat Maya down at the kitchen table. The sunset cast golden light across the room, and for the first time, Maya felt they were having a conversation not as a child and parent, but as two strong women. Her mother told her about the sacrifices she had made in the military, the missions that nearly broke her, the friends she had lost, the nights she cried silently but got up anyway. Then she looked into Maya's eyes and said, "Strength isn't about fighting battles with guns or fists. It's about standing tall when others try to tear you down. Yesterday you stood tall. I'm proud of you." Those words wrapped around Maya's heart like armor, giving her a courage she never thought possible. As Maya went to bed that night, she realized the incident with Daniels had transformed more than just her reputation at school. It had awakened something within her. She wasn't just her mother's daughter, she was a reflection of her strength, resilience, and honor. And deep down, Maya knew this was only the beginning of her own story. The final test of Maya's strength came sooner than she expected. A month after the confrontation, her school hosted a community event where police officers were invited to speak with students about safety and responsibility. Officer Daniels was there, noticeably humbled since the day her mother had shown up. When the Q&A began, a student asked a pointed question about respect and accountability, how authority figures should act when they're wrong. Daniels hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Maya. To everyone's surprise, he admitted he had made mistakes, including one that had taught him an unforgettable lesson. Without naming her, he spoke about judging people by appearances and how quickly arrogance could destroy trust. The room grew quiet, the weight of his words sinking in. But the true moment of triumph came later. Maya was called up to the stage to introduce her mother, who had been asked to give a closing speech as a decorated veteran and community leader. The crowd erupted in applause when her mother stepped forward in her crisp uniform, medals gleaming under the lights. Maya stood proudly beside her, no longer the timid girl who had been mocked and dismissed. As her mother spoke about service, honor, and resilience, Maya caught sight of Daniels in the crowd. His head bowed, his expression pale, just as it had been that unforgettable day. When the event ended, students and teachers surrounded Maya, asking about her future, inspired by both her and her mother's strength. For the first time, Maya didn't shrink away from the attention. She smiled and said she wasn't sure what path she would take. Maybe law, maybe the military, maybe something entirely different. But she knew one thing for certain: she would live with the same courage her mother had shown her. Walking out of the auditorium, she felt taller, stronger, and freer than she ever had before. She wasn't just the girl with the Special Forces mom. She was Maya, unapologetically powerfully herself.